Hey everybody, welcome to the SimHanger and welcome also to the sixth and final part in my Virtual Reality Essentials series. In my previous video, VR Setup A to Z, we got you up and flying in virtual reality. In this video, we're turning it up a notch and configuring your system for optimal performance. We'll have a look at a number of things we can do to improve performance, but our main focus is on the third-party application OpenXR Toolkit. As per the rest of the series, our focus remains on Windows Mixed Reality headsets and the HP Reverb G2 in particular. This is the SimHanger channel. My name's Mark. Thanks for watching and let's get started. In my previous video, we installed the OpenXR tools for Windows Mixed Reality. This is an add-on app for VR available via the Microsoft Store and allows us to configure some options within the OpenXR interface for VR. The add-on application we're going to be looking at today is somewhat confusingly called the OpenXR Toolkit, a very similar name but a totally different application. It's not from Microsoft and it's developed by a third party. The OpenXR Toolkit does very much the same thing as the OpenXR tools for Windows Mixed Reality, in that it allows us to customize the render scale and therefore have a direct impact on our VR performance. So why should we bother with it? Well, the OpenXR Toolkit is more efficient in the way it upscales the image to your headset, so less heavy on resources. And in addition to that, not only can we adjust the render scale, but there's a multitude of other options made available to us that allows us to dig down and get the best performance possible. It's worth noting at this point that OpenXR Toolkit is not a replacement for the OpenXR tools for Windows Mixed Reality. Both are still required. Nearly all VR users will gain a benefit from using the OpenXR Toolkit. However, the benefit or advantage you may gain will vary subject very much to what CPU and GPU processing power you have at your disposal. OpenXR tools for Windows Mixed Reality and the OpenXR Toolkit both work on the same basic principle for improving performance, and that is reducing the size of the base or native resolution of the headset. The native resolution is 3176 by 3100. This is then projected into the headset, and after corrections made for barrel distortion, etc., provide you with the 2160 by 2160 pixels per eye for the HP Reverb G2. A performance gain is achieved because the computer doesn't have to work so hard. It can generate a smaller image much faster and project that into the headset. Both of the applications use an upscaling tool then to restore the image so that you still get your 2160 by 2160 pixels per eye. But we all know what happens when you take a smaller image and effectively blow it up. We lose graphics fidelity and we lose some detail. The advantage that the OpenXR Toolkit provides is that the algorithms used for upscaling are more efficient or quicker, and secondly, they have a number of tools that can help sharpen the image to restore some of the lost graphics back to what it was. Although there's something for everybody in this series of videos, it is principally designed for those relatively new to VR. The series is designed to build knowledge and skill levels on a progressive basis. So if you haven't watched the other videos in the series, there is a link to the playlist in the notes below the video. Each video is focused on a particular area of virtual reality. If you like a channel that digs into the detail, then this may be for you, so don't forget to hit the subscribe button and tap the bell for future notifications. It follows, therefore, that those likely to get maximum benefit from the OpenXR Toolkit are those on low to mid-range systems. Those on Series 10, 11 or 12 Intel chips and GPUs such as 1080 Ti and up are going to see far less benefit, but there are some benefits nonetheless. To get your hands on the OpenXR Toolkit, go to the website, link in the notes below, and download the latest version. At time of recording, that's 1.1.0. Before installing, you may find it very useful just to have a look at some of the notes included. In addition to details on the various features within the application and some very helpful explanations, there is also a section dedicated to Microsoft Flight Simulator, which includes a number of recommendations and suggestions for a testing method to arrive at optimal performance. The OpenXR Toolkit is freeware, so there's no cost included. My thanks to the developer Matt for providing such a versatile tool for VR users. There's also a section that deals with how to disable in-game sharpening. Some users have reported better results, and this will involve editing your user config file. I personally haven't done this, but the information's there if you want it. There's also information on hand tracking, something I'll be featuring in an upcoming video. The file downloaded is a Windows package installer file, and click it to install. Chances are you're likely to get this warning come up. Windows Security saying it's an unrecognized app. Click on More Info and then Run Anyway, and the installation will go ahead. Once installed, you'll have this new icon on your desktop, and I recommend you pin it to your taskbar. When you double-click the icon, this is what you'll see. Note the application actually runs in VR. What you're seeing here is purely the basic configurator for the application. Once you've set your preferences, there's no need to reopen this. Providing the application is active, it will be available in VR. You can check that the application has been installed and is active. There's a message in the OpenXR Toolkit as indicated, and secondly, you can check your OpenXR tools for Windows Mixed Reality application under the API layers, and it should read exactly as shown. I'm not going to run through every item as it's fairly self-explanatory. You tick the box to activate that task. You can disable the OpenXR Toolkit completely, and the render settings will revert back to what's in Sim and in the OpenXR Tools for Windows Mixed Reality. I recommend that you enable experimental settings so you can see all the features available within the application. And make sure that the FS 2020 box is ticked. This should be enabled by default. Once you're in VR and you bring up the VR menu, you will need to move around and change various numbers. By default, it's F1 to go left, F3 to go right, and F2 to move down. And these keys are used in combination with the selected modifier. In this case, it's the Control key. When changing parameters, this will typically be the Control key plus the F1 or the F3 key. As the OpenXR Toolkit will be managing our VR resolution, and to get best effect, make sure your in-sim render scale is set at 100%, and the OpenXR Tools for Windows Mixed Reality render scale is also set at 100%. Any render changes needed we'll be making in the OpenXR Toolkit. As this is a VR application, I thought we'd do this next section in VR. What you're looking at on the right-hand side is the Windows Mixed Reality mirror window, as covered in my previous video, and on the left is the standard VR view. Ctrl F2 to bring up the menu. The VR menu is only available for a short period of time, and you can see it counting down on screen. So the first thing we'll want to do is change that. And we can do that by bringing up the menu once again, and then using the Ctrl F3 key we can page across the top menu items to Menu. We can now use Ctrl F2 to move down in the menu, and we're looking for Menu Timeout. Set by default to Medium. We're going to change that to None. I recommend you do this. You can exit the menu by choosing the Exit Menu option at any time when you're using this application. Okay, let's go back to the first tab, which is Performance. The movement keys up, down, left and right are shown at the bottom of each menu. I'm not going to cover every menu item in total detail. Today we'll focus on those that are more important. And our first option under the Performance tab is Overlay. And essentially this allows us to display a frames per second counter, which will be very helpful to us when we're doing our tests, so we can judge performance. However, and I've said this before, don't get hung up on the frame rates. It's how smooth it feels to you that is important. And this brings us round to the sticky subject of frame rates in Microsoft Flight Simulator. You'll have heard many times when in VR you need 90 frames per second to get very best performance, and this is often the case in video games supporting VR. And as covered in a previous video, motion reprojection can help us get towards that 90 frames per second. But if you take the flight that's on screen at the moment, it's averaging 34 frames per second. Motion reprojection is not on. Settings were as per my previous video. The airport is an add-on with fairly dense scenery, and flying over Chicago at low level in the G36, which features 2 G1000 panels to put further stress on the system. Lots of water around, so I'm getting the impact of reflections and also some fairly heavy cloud cover. And I can say that the VR performance was good and the flight was smooth. I've also flown into JFK in very similar conditions in the Aerosoft CRJ. And recorded an average of just under 30 frames per second, and it felt smooth. So how is this possible? Well, the answer is an elusive one, but as far as I can ascertain, and here I must express my thanks to Rotorick, Matt the developer, and Captain Lucky for input, that in addition to rendering optimizations, the answer in part lies in simply that it is a flight simulation. That comparatively speaking, the amount of angular movement and translation compared to a normal video game is somewhat less. It's relatively low, and therefore 30 frames per second is adequate to give us the perception of a smooth VR experience. How accurate the various frame counters are, I don't know, but that's largely irrelevant. What's important is we've got a stable measurement to gauge our performance by. So when doing your tests, whether you're into airliners or GA or perhaps bush piloting, you should do your tests in an area and environment which will stress the system and change those settings up and down till you achieve about 33 frames per second. Just to give yourself a little bit of headroom, and then you should have achieved what I regard as set and forget VR settings. Go anywhere, fly anywhere, and get a good performance 99% of the time. Moving on to the core feature upscaling. We have three options: off, NIS, and FSR. NIS is the NVIDIA-based algorithm, and FSR is the AMD-based algorithm for upscaling. The selection of the upscaling method is not based on your graphics card, it's simply a different algorithm. You should try both. I personally have selected FSR, even though I've got an RTX 3090. That's simply because for my system, FSR provides far less shimmer than the NIS scaler does. The anamorphic setting has two options, on or off. With anamorphic set to on, it allows you to individually adjust the width and height of the rendered image. For initial testing, I strongly recommend that this is off. Unless your headset has a particularly wide FOV, you're unlikely to use this feature. The next setting is the critical one, and that's size. Currently it's 100%, and therefore the rendered image is at default 3176 by 3100. We can now reduce the size of the image with the effect of improving performance, but as the smaller image will have to be upscaled, we will lose some graphic fidelity and clarity. For lower end systems, I'd go down to 70% to start, mid-range 80%, and top end 85%. Select your setting. If you're getting a good performance, go up by 5% and test again. If you're getting a poor performance, well, go down by 5% or adjust your in-sim settings. However, your render size image needs to be done in conjunction with sharpness. And this is one of the gems of the OpenXR Toolkit. Despite selecting a lower res image, by adjusting the sharpness, we can bring back some of that graphics quality and clarity. So the overall penalty is minimal. If using the NIS scaler, I would select 20% and work your way up from there. 40% is quite popular. And for FSR, I would start around the 35% mark. My personal setting is around 55 to 60%. Fixed foveated rendering, or FFR for short, is an additional graphical method of improving performance, and it does this by allowing different resolutions for the one image. Typically, that would be the best possible image in the center of the screen where you look most often, with a reducing resolution as we move more and more towards the periphery of your vision. As some of the image is at a lower resolution, the computer doesn't have to work so hard and can render the image quicker, thus improving performance. The downside is if you move your eyes as opposed to your head in the VR headset, well, you will see the lower res images on the outer edges of your peripheral vision. The smaller the FOV of your headset, arguably, the bigger the penalty. But FFR can make a big difference to your performance, so it's definitely worth experimenting with. To enable FFR, you've got two options. One, a preset, and secondly, a custom, where you can adjust the size of the areas affected by the different resolutions. To demonstrate this, let's just go back to the preset and have a look on the left-hand side of the screen. I hope this comes out on the video, but we can see the inner ring, which has the highest resolution, the middle ring with a different resolution, and the area outside that would be the outer ring with the lowest resolution. So we have one VR image, but with 3 different resolutions. We can demonstrate this again by going to Custom. The inner ring is set at ×1 to whatever the selected resolution is. As we adjust the size of the inner ring, on the left-hand side we can see the ring increase or decrease in size. You can adjust the inner and outer ring, and what's left in the middle is the middle ring. In addition to the ring size, we can change the resolution. Here I'm changing the resolution of the middle ring, and on the left-hand side of the screen you can see the impact that those changes have as the resolution increases and decreases. As an example, middle ring resolutions are half, quarter, 1/8 or 1/16, and that's a fraction of the selected resolution you set in your size parameters. A typical time when you may use FFR or fixed foveated rendering would be to improve the percentage or the size of the native resolution and use that in conjunction with FFR to achieve the performance level desired. You will need to experiment. I recommend you change one setting at a time, give it a go, and then come back and make the necessary adjustments. And as I mentioned previously in this video, I believe those that will benefit the most are those with low to medium range graphics cards. You could see a huge performance boost and make a VR experience which was marginal at best into a great performance, with a small sacrifice in graphical fidelity. In my particular case, I'm not using FFR, and the only reason I'm not using it is I don't need to. With my render scale set at 90% and having a 10900K CPU and an RTX 3090, I'm getting a good performance. I don't need the added boost from FFR, but if I did, I wouldn't hesitate to use it. That's our Performance tab done. Let's now move on to Appearance. And first of all, let's look at another neat feature, the post-processing. By default it's off, let's turn it on. And it's in here that we can adjust the contrast, brightness and colors within the VR headset. We can select them individually, or we can choose one of 3 presets: light, dark and true night. True night will give you deeper, more realistic blacks in the Reverb headset for flying at night. But you also get the option to adjust these to your liking individually, covering your contrast, brightness, exposure, saturation and so on. Microsoft Flight Simulator color-wise is oversaturated. The colors quite often are just a little bit too vivid. And later on in the video I'll be showing you my settings that I've used here. Also within Appearance is World Scale, and that does what it says on the tin. In effect, this allows you to adjust the size of a cockpit to more accurately represent what's in the real world, as some of the cockpits are far too small in Microsoft Flight Simulator and some are too large. Going now to the Inputs menu, we have Shaking Reduction, and this is a godsend for HP Reverb G2 users, and I recommend you turn this down between 60 and 45%. The tracking of the headset is too sensitive, with some people reporting even their heartbeats are moving their headset slightly. This dampens that effect. If you're using a headset that uses base stations, well, you won't need to worry about this one. Under the Systems menu, the first option is to override the resolution. And what this does is it ignores the resolution you've set in the OpenXR Toolkit and reverts back to the OpenXR Tools for Windows Mixed Reality resolution, but allows it to be used in conjunction with the other tools within this application. What motion reprojection is was discussed in my previous video, and I would suggest for your initial tests, move this to off. When motion reprojection is selected as on, you get the option of whether or not to lock the motion reprojection rate. And again, for initial testing, I would strongly suggest that this is left unlocked. Locking your motion reprojection will make it very difficult for you to establish your best settings. In a perfect world, you would never use motion reprojection, because your frame rates would be such that even low to the ground and doing sharp turns, everything would be smooth. But if, for example, you're in a high built-up area, the chances are you're going to get some micro pauses and the odd stutter as you fly through buildings, with motion reprojection off. The hardware that's currently available is just not up to the task right now. We're close, but we're not there yet. I'm fortunate enough to have a fairly beefy system, and I don't have motion reprojection on, but I do occasionally get the odd micro stutter or judder when flying in dense scenery and fairly low to the ground. That's just my personal preference. The other option I have is to enable motion reprojection, and the chances are those micro stutters and the odd judder would disappear because of the additional transitional frames being inserted into the headset, but it does bring with it a number of graphical anomalies. You should try both and see what is your preference. The other time you should use motion reprojection is if you're really struggling to get performance. Motion reprojection can give you yet another boost. And if you are using motion reprojection and you lock your frame rates, I would strongly recommend that you lock the frame rate below what your CPU is producing. If you're getting 35 frames per second, well, lock it at about 31 or 32. Leave yourself some headroom. You'll get a much smoother performance that way. I would also suggest don't lock your frame rates outside of the sim, in the NVIDIA control panel. Rather do it in OpenXR. And have motion reprojection either on or off. I don't recommend the automatic setting. The reason I say that is that motion reprojection will try and look for 22.5 frames per second, 30 or 45 frames per second. And if you're getting a big variance in frame rates, you'll find some pauses and stutters as the system hunts from one frame rate to the next. Also under the system is field of view and adjustment. I won't be covering these today, but I suggest you leave them at default. Okay, that's that covered. Let's go back to the top menus, and the next one and the last one is menu. First item is show expert settings. I'd leave that no for now. The rest are fairly self-explanatory except for the menu eye offset. As you can only view the menu in VR, if you find that you've got double figures or the image isn't clear, you can change this value from 0 to plus and minus, and it will adjust the image to make it easier to read and to see. For those interested, here are my OpenXR Toolkit settings. I'm using the FSR algorithm to upscale my image, and my image is at 90%. Sharpness at 60%, and I'm not using FFR. Under appearance, I've chosen not to use one of the presets, but have adjusted the contrast, brightness, saturation, etc. as indicated. With these settings, I felt that the image looked more real world. As I've got the Reverb G2, I've got the shaking reduction at -45%, and I have motion reprojection off. Under the Systems menu. Under the Menu tab, I adjusted the eye offset to 66 pixels, suited my eyes. One final note, you'll note it says restart the VR session to apply changes. This only applies to one or two of the settings, mainly changing the base or native resolution. But you don't have to close down your sim and restart. Simply exit VR in Microsoft Flight Simulator, wait literally 2 or 3 seconds and re-enter VR, and the changes will be effective. So here are the results of my implementation of the OpenXR Toolkit. Using the same test as demonstrated during this video, I got a 13% improvement in average frame rate. But the single biggest benefit for me was a sharper and cleaner image overall. I can pick out details from further away. If you're interested in my CRJ test at JFK, my performance improved from an average of 27 frames per second to 30 frames per second. One quick note worth mentioning is that the OpenXR Toolkit at 90% in terms of render size is exactly the same as the OpenXR tools for Windows Mixed Reality at 95%. The OpenXR Toolkit reduces resolution more aggressively. If, like me, you use GeForce Experience to keep your NVIDIA drivers up to date, there's one or two things you can do to help improve performance. With GeForce running, hit Ctrl Alt Delete to bring up the Task Manager, and then under Processes, this will list everything running on your PC. Click the little arrow in the name box and it will change the order in which all the applications are shown to alphabetical, which will make it easier to find what we're looking for right now. There we go, that's now alphabetical. And under Background Processes, scroll down, we're looking for NVIDIA. And we should find a whole range of NVIDIA drivers and containers. There they are. There are 10 NVIDIA background processes currently running on my system. And the chances are that they're running on your system too if you're using GeForce Experience. Go to GeForce Experience, under the System setting, you'll see there's a tab there for in-game overlay. Turn that off and you can see it's automatically halved the number of processes running in the background. Turn it back on again and they come back. Turning off the background processes turns off your ability to record from the screen, but for day-to-day use, unless you're a content creator like me, this is no big loss. Let's now head to our desktop, and on the taskbar on the right-hand side, click the small up arrow to see what applications are running. Get rid of any you don't need, such as IQ. This controls the LEDs on my system and takes up 400 MB of memory quite often. But what we're most interested in is the NVIDIA control panel. Let's open that. Many monitors these days are G-Sync compatible or semi-compatible. You'll see this in the display option as Setup G-Sync. If this option is available and you haven't tried it, enable it and see how it works. Enable it for both window and full screen mode. If on the other hand, like me, you have it enabled, test the sim and see what it's like with it disabled. Many users are reporting a considerable improvement in performance with G-Sync disabled on non-G-Sync monitors. From what I've seen, results do vary, but it's worth a try. Well, is VR for you? I hope that this series of videos has given you enough of a taste for you to make an informed decision. VR technology has come quite a way in the last couple of years, and now it's possible to place you right in the middle of a 3D world. And with Microsoft Flight Simulator, well, you can go anywhere you want to. VR is slowly but surely becoming mainstream, and if it's immersion you're after, well, it's right here and it's waiting for you. If you're thinking of jumping into VR, please drop a comment in the notes below. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you found this useful and informative. Stay well, look after yourselves, I'll see you again soon, and bye for now.